For thousands of years, humans looked at Mars as a silent red star in the night sky. It was far away, it was quiet, and it looked empty. No one believed that one day this red planet would become the biggest hope for human survival, but that day finally came. On Earth, life was becoming harder every year. The planet was changing. The weather was no longer normal. Summers were hotter, winters were colder, storms were stronger, forests were burning, oceans were rising. Scientists warned the world many times. They said Earth was in danger. At first, people did not listen. Cities kept growing, more people were born every day, resources became limited, clean water was harder to find, fresh air was no longer fresh, food prices went up, many places became unlivable. Slowly the warnings turned into fear, then fear turned into panic. One night, deep inside a space research center, a group of scientists sat in silence. Large screens showed images of Earth from space. The planet looked beautiful but fragile. One scientist finally spoke, "This planet cannot support us forever." The room stayed quiet. They all knew the truth. Earth was the only home humans had ever known, but now that home was sending a desperate message. Time was running out. This was not a movie. This was real life. The scientists asked a dangerous question. If Earth fails, where will humans go? The answer was not easy. The moon was too small. It had no atmosphere. Other planets were too far, too cold, too deadly. Then one name returned again and again, Mars, the red planet. Mars was cold, Mars was dry, Mars had no oxygen. It was not friendly to life at all, but Mars had something important, hope. Mars was close compared to other planets. It had water ice, it had soil, and one day it could be changed. This idea sounded impossible, but humans had done impossible things before. They crossed oceans, they climbed the highest mountains, they went to the moon, so they asked another question. Can humans survive on Mars? At first the answer was simple. No, Mars had no air to breathe. The temperature could kill a human in minutes. Radiation from space hit the surface every day. One dust storm could cover the whole planet. Mars was a dead world, but Earth was slowly becoming one too. This was the desperate call. Not from Mars, but from Earth itself. Around the world, governments started to listen. Space agencies worked day and night. Engineers designed new machines. Doctors studied the human body in space. Psychologists studied the human mind. The mission was no longer about exploration, it was about survival, but the biggest problem was not reaching Mars. The biggest problem was staying alive there. Humans could not walk freely on Mars, they needed protection. They needed homes, they needed food, water, and air. Every small mistake could end the mission forever, and there would be no rescue. Once humans leave Earth for Mars, they are alone. Millions of kilometers away, no second chance. Some people called it madness, others called it courage, but the scientists called it necessary because Earth was changing faster than expected. And time was running out. The first humans chosen for Mars were not heroes from stories. They were normal people. Scientists, engineers, doctors, farmers. They trained for years. They knew they might never return. They knew they might die on Mars. But they also knew one thing: if they succeed, humanity would have a future. If they fail, Earth might be the last chapter of human history. As the plan moved forward, one truth became clear. Mars would never be easy. Mars would test the human body. Mars would test the human mind. Mars would test what it truly means to survive. And this was only the beginning, because deciding to go to Mars was the first step. The real challenge was yet to come. The journey, the landing, and the fight to stay alive on a planet that does not want humans to live. This was not just a mission. This was the desperate call of humanity. And Mars was about to answer. The decision was made. Humans would go to Mars, but once this decision was taken, there was no turning back. Leaving Earth was not like any journey before. This time, humans were not exploring, they were escaping, and escape has a price. The spacecraft stood silent on the launch pad, tall, powerful, dangerous. Inside it were humans who knew something very few people ever face. This was a one-way door. Once it opened, there was no return to normal life. No blue sky, no rain, no fresh air, only space. The journey to Mars would take many months. During this time, spacecraft would travel through deep space, a place where humans do not belong. Outside the ship was pure danger. Deadly radiation moved freely. Tiny space rocks flew faster than bullets. One hit could destroy everything. Inside the ship, life was small and tight. The crew lived in narrow rooms. They slept in floating beds. They ate packed food. Every drop of water was counted. There was no waste. Everything was reused. Water from breath, water from sweat, water from tears. Nothing could be lost. The human body began to change. Without gravity, muscles became weak. Bones slowly lost strength. Blood moved differently. The heart had to learn a new way to work. Doctors watched every heartbeat, every breath, because one serious medical problem could end the mission. There was no hospital in space, no emergency room, no help coming. Then there was the mind. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Outside the small window, there was nothing, only black space and distant stars. No day, no night, just time moving slowly. The crew talked to Earth, but the messages were delayed, sometimes by many minutes, sometimes more. If something went wrong, help would come too late. They were truly alone. Some nights, one of the crew members would look at Earth, a small blue dot far away. Everything they loved was there: family, friends, memories. And slowly, that dot became smaller. Fear grew quietly. Not fear of death, fear of failure, because failure did not mean only death, it meant the end of hope. One small system failure could be fatal: oxygen machines, water systems, temperature control. Everything had backups, but backups could fail too. During the journey, alarms sometimes went off. Red lights filled the cabin, hearts raced. Breathing became heavy, then silence, problem fixed. But every alarm left a scar on the mind. The crew understood one truth: Mars was not forgiving, and they had not even reached it yet. As the spacecraft moved closer, Mars grew larger. The red planet filled the windows. It looked calm, it looked beautiful, but they knew better. Mars was cold, Mars was silent, Mars was deadly. The landing would be the most dangerous moment. The planet had an atmosphere, but it was too thin, not enough to slow the ship easily. Parachutes alone would not work. Engines alone would not work. Everything had to work together, perfectly. There was no second try. If the angle was wrong, the ship would burn. If the speed was wrong, the ship would crash. Millions of kilometers away from Earth, humans prepared for the hardest test of their lives. This was the point of no return. Once they started landing, they could not go back to space. Mars would decide their fate. The crew took their seats, suits sealed, breathing systems checked. Silence filled the cabin. Then the descent began. The ship shook violently. Heat covered the outer shell, flames surrounded them. The sound was deafening. Inside, no one spoke, everyone waited. Seconds felt like hours. One mistake, one error, one failed calculation, and history would end here. The ship slowed, the shaking reduced, then suddenly quiet. The engines fired one last time, dust filled the air outside. The landing legs touched the surface. Mars, they had arrived, but this was not victory. This was the beginning of survival. Because landing on Mars was only step one. Living on Mars would be the real battle, and Mars was ready to test them. Mars did not welcome them. The moment the engines stopped, silence filled the land, a silence so deep it felt heavy. Outside the ship, the red planet stretched in every direction, cold, empty, endless. This world did not care who they were or why they came. The crew stayed inside the spacecraft. They did not rush out. They knew one mistake could kill them. Mars had no air for human lungs. One broken seal, one small crack, and life would end in seconds. Through the window they saw the ground. Red dust covered everything. Rocks were sharp and dry. The sky was not blue, it was a dull orange. This was not Earth, this was a warning. Before anyone could step outside, systems had to be checked again and again. Oxygen levels, pressure, temperature, radiation shields, everything had to work. Because outside the ship, Mars was waiting. When the first human finally stepped onto the surface, the moment felt unreal. The suit was heavy. Movements were slow, gravity was weak, each step felt strange. The ground did not feel alive, no wind sound, no birds, no water, only dust moving slowly. Mars was beautiful and deadly. The temperature was far below freezing. If the suit failed, the body would shut down fast. Blood would boil, skin would freeze. Mars showed no mercy. The crew worked quickly. They placed sensors into the ground, they tested the air. They measured radiation levels. The numbers were not good. Radiation from space hit the surface directly. There was no strong atmosphere to block it. Staying outside too long was dangerous. Time was limited. Every mission outside was a race against death. Then came the storms. Mars dust storms were different from Earth. They were massive. They could last for weeks. Fine dust filled the air and covered everything. Solar panels could stop working. Visibility could disappear. If a storm trapped them outside, survival would be unlikely. The crew understood something very important. Mars was not an enemy. Mars was worse. It was indifferent. It did not attack. It did not chase. It simply existed, and that existence was enough to kill. They returned to the spacecraft and sealed the door. Inside felt safer, but not safe. The spacecraft was never meant to be a long-term home. Walls were thin. Space was limited. Systems were under stress. They needed a shelter. Fast. Plans became actions. They searched for the right location, somewhere with natural protection, somewhere lower, somewhere safer. The answer was underground. Beneath the red soil, radiation was weaker. Temperature was more stable. Mars still did not care, but it was slightly less deadly. Machines drilled into the ground, dust filled the air, time passed slowly. Every sound was a reminder if the machines failed. There was no backup. This was survival without safety. As the first underground space was prepared, the crew felt something new: relief, but it was small. Mars had many ways to kill: cold, radiation, isolation, failure, and they had only faced the surface. Food was still limited, water was still precious, oxygen still depended on machines, and machines could break. Mars was not a home, not yet. It was a test of human strength, a test of human patience, a test of human will. As they looked at the red horizon from inside their shelter, one truth became clear. Reaching Mars was easy compared to this. Surviving one day was hard, surviving 1 year would be a miracle, and surviving forever, that question had no answer yet, because Mars does not care. And that is what makes it so dangerous. Mars did not give them homes, so humans had to create one. Inside the underground shelter, the air felt thin but safe. Machines hummed quietly. Lights replaced the sun. Every sound meant life was still working, but this place was temporary. Humans could not survive long in small metal rooms. They needed a real base. A place to live, work, and breathe without fear every second. On Earth, humans build homes with wood, steel, and concrete. On Mars, none of these existed. There were no trees, no rivers, no ready materials, only dust. Red, dry dust. At first, it looked useless. Scientists saw something else. Opportunity. Mars soil could be used. With the right pressure and heat, it could become strong like concrete. Robots began to collect the soil. Machines pressed it into hard blocks. Brick by brick, the first Mars structures began to rise, not tall buildings, low, thick, heavy, designed to survive, not to look beautiful. Walls were built wide to block radiation. Roofs were covered with extra soil. Everything was made simple, strong, and safe. These were not houses, they were shields. Inside, space was planned carefully. No wasted room, every corner had a purpose. Sleeping areas were small, work areas were shared, privacy became a luxury. Humans had to change. Life on Mars did not allow comfort, it allowed survival. Outside the shelters, machines worked day and night. Robots did what humans could not. They faced radiation. They worked in the cold. They never got tired. Humans watched from inside. Trusting metal more than muscle. Every completed wall felt like a small victory, but danger never left. A sudden dust storm covered the land. The sky turned darker. Wind pushed dust into every small opening. Solar power dropped. Lights inside the shelter became dim. Energy was life. Without power, oxygen systems would fail. Water systems would stop. Heat would disappear. The crew reduced everything. Lights lower, machines slower, movement limited. They waited. Hours passed. Then days. The storm tested their patience and their planning. When it finally ended, Mars looked the same. Cold, red, silent, but the shelter stood strong. That day, humans learned something important. Mars could be survived, not easily but carefully. Slowly the base grew larger, new rooms were added, storage areas, medical spaces, control rooms. This place was no longer just a shelter, it was becoming a colony. Still, one big problem remained. Homes could protect the body, but they could not feed it. Food supplies from Earth were limited. Every package opened meant one step closer to hunger. Mars had no farms, no animals, no soil ready for plants. If humans wanted to stay, they had to grow food here, on a planet that never allowed life to grow. As they looked at the sealed food containers, the crew understood the truth. Building walls was only the beginning, because without food, Mars would win. And the real fight for survival was about to start. Mars could break machines. Mars could damage shelters, but hunger was different. Hunger was silent. Inside the Mars base, food supplies were counted again and again. Every packet had a number, every number had meaning. Each meal eaten was one step closer to the end. The crew knew one truth: food from Earth would not last forever. If humans wanted to stay on Mars, they had to grow their own food. Mars did not want plants to live. There was no rain, no warm sunlight, no healthy soil. On Earth, plants grow easily. On Mars, every plant was a fight. The first farming room was small, very small. Lights replaced the sun. Water came from recycled systems. Air was controlled by machines. This was not a farm, it was an experiment. Seeds were planted carefully. Scientists watched closely. Every leaf mattered. Every root was important. Days passed. Nothing happened. The soil was wrong. Mars soil had chemicals harmful to plants. It was dry and lifeless. Plants struggled to survive. The crew felt fear again. If plants failed, humans would fail. Then they changed the plan. Instead of soil, they used water. Plants grew without dirt. Roots floated in water filled with nutrients. Every drop was controlled. Every light was timed. This system was fragile. If power failed, plants would die. If water stopped, plants would die. If one mistake happened, food would be gone. The first green leaf appeared after many days. It was small, but it was alive. That leaf changed everything. Hope returned. Slowly, more plants grew. Lettuce, small vegetables, simple food, not tasty, not exciting, but it was food, fresh food, something Earth-like. The crew smiled for the first time in a long while, but Mars did not stop testing them. Water became the next problem. Mars had water, but not like Earth. It was frozen underground. Machines drilled deep to reach ice. Ice was melted slowly. Water was precious. It was used for drinking, for oxygen, for farming. Nothing was wasted. Even dirty water was cleaned and reused, again and again. The same water passed through human bodies, machines, and plants. Water became life itself. Then something unexpected happened. One farming system failed. Lights went off for a few hours. When power returned, several plants were dead. Food was lost, not much, but enough to send fear through the base. That night, no one slept well. They understood something important. Mars survival had no safety, no backup planet, no extra chance. Every system was connected. Food depended on power, power depended on machines, machines depended on humans. One weak link could break everything. The crew worked harder. New systems were added, more protection, more planning. They did not trust luck. They trusted preparation. Months passed, the farm grew larger, more food types were tested, some failed, some survived. Humans learned what Mars allowed and what it did not. Food on Mars would never be easy, it would never be enough without effort, every meal would always be earned. But humans adapted, they always had. As they ate their first full meal grown on Mars, the moment felt special. It was not delicious, it was not perfect, but it was proof. Life could exist here. Even on a dead planet, yet another problem waited. Humans could eat, but could they breathe? Because Mars air was not made for human lungs, and one broken oxygen system could end everything in seconds. Survival was not finished. It was only moving to the next test on Mars. Breathing was not natural. It was a choice made by machines. Inside the base, humans did not take deep breaths without thinking. Every breath passed through filters, pipes, and systems. Air was created, not found. Mars air was thin and deadly. It was mostly carbon dioxide. Oxygen was almost nothing. Outside, one open door meant instant death, so the base became a living machine, a machine that made air. Special systems pulled Mars air inside. Machines broke carbon dioxide apart and released oxygen, slowly, carefully. Every sound from these machines mattered. A normal hum meant life. A strange noise meant danger. The crew checked oxygen levels many times a day. Small screens showed numbers that decided life or death. If oxygen dropped too low, the human brain would fail first. Vision would blur, thoughts would slow, death would come quietly. That was the fear they lived with. Water and air were connected. Water was broken into oxygen and hydrogen. Oxygen was used for breathing. Hydrogen was stored or released safely. Nothing was simple, everything was fragile. One night, alarms screamed. Red lights filled the base. Oxygen levels were falling fast. The crew moved quickly. Training took over. One person checked the filters, another checked the power lines, another sealed off sections of the base. For a moment, panic tried to enter, but panic had no place on Mars. They found the problem, a small blockage. Tiny dust particles had entered the system. Mars dust. The same dust that covered the planet had almost ended the mission. The system was fixed. Air returned. Silence followed, but fear stayed. That night they understood something very clearly. Mars did not attack loudly. Mars attacked slowly, through dust, through cold, through silence. Every system was now double-checked. Filters were replaced more often. Backups were tested daily. But even with perfect systems, one problem remained. Humans produce waste. On Earth, waste is thrown away. On Mars, waste was valuable. Human waste was cleaned and reused. Water was pulled back. Nutrients were saved for plants. Nothing left the cycle. The base became a closed world, no waste, no escape. Some crew members struggled with this idea, living in the same air, drinking the same water again and again, but survival required sacrifice. Every drop mattered, every breath mattered. Over time, humans adapted. The fear became normal. Checking air levels became routine. Machines became trusted partners. Still, one thought never left their minds. What if the systems failed completely? There was no natural air outside, no emergency backup planet, no help coming. They lived on the edge of survival every second, yet something strange happened. As days turned into months, the crew stopped fearing every breath. They started living again, they talked, they laughed quietly, they planned the future. Mars was still dangerous, but humans were learning its rules. They were not conquering Mars, they were cooperating with it. Breathing on Mars was never easy, but it was possible, and that possibility meant everything. Still, one final challenge remained. The body could survive, the mind was next, because isolation and loneliness can destroy even the strongest humans. And Mars was very lonely. Mars did not only test the body, it tested the mind. Inside the base, days felt the same. There was no sunrise, no sunset. Only artificial lights that turned on and off. Time lost meaning. On Earth, humans look at the sky to feel alive. On Mars, the sky was a reminder of danger. No one could walk outside freely. No one could feel wind on their skin. The base was safe, but it was also a cage. People missed simple things, the sound of rain, the smell of soil, the color green. Small memories became heavy. Some crew members had trouble sleeping. Others became quiet. Smiles became rare. Loneliness was everywhere. They talked to Earth, but messages were delayed. A simple question took many minutes to answer. A deep conversation was almost impossible. When bad news came from Earth, there was no hug, no comfort, only silence. The crew was trained for this. Psychologists warned them, but knowing the problem did not remove it. The human mind needs connection. Mars gave none. Tension slowly grew. Small arguments felt bigger. Tiny mistakes caused anger. Everyone felt pressure. They were not bad people, they were tired people. One crew member stopped talking much. Another worked too long without rest. One stared at old photos every night. The base had strong walls, but emotions passed through them easily. To survive, they changed their routine. They created fake days, fake nights, fake weekends. They celebrated small events, a successful harvest, a system upgrade, a birthday. Music helped, stories helped. Old Earth movies played on screens. Laughter returned, not loud, but real. They also shared their fears. Talking became medicine. Silence became the enemy. They learned something important. Survival was not only about systems, it was about each other. When one person felt weak, another stayed close. When hope faded, someone reminded them why they came, not for adventure, not for fame, but for the future. Mars still felt empty. The walls still felt close. The sky still felt dangerous, but the crew felt less alone. They began to see Mars differently, not as a prison, but as a challenge shared together. One night, a crew member looked at Earth through a small window. The blue dot was barely visible. It looked small, but it felt close, because Earth was no longer just a place. It was a memory, and memories can keep humans alive. As time passed, something changed. Mars was no longer only a place of fear. It became a place of purpose. Humans were not just surviving anymore. They were learning how to live. The silent war inside the mind did not end. But humans were winning slowly together, and one final question remained. Could this life continue? Could humans stay on Mars forever, or was this only a temporary fight? The answer waited in the future. A future where Mars might become a second home, or a final test. Mars was still cold, still silent, still dangerous, but something had changed. Humans were still alive. Months had passed since the first landing. What started as survival slowly turned into routine, not comfort, not safety, routine. The base worked, food grew, air flowed, water recycled. Life continued, not easily but steadily. For the first time, humans were not just visitors on Mars, they were residents. Children were not born here yet, cities did not exist. But the idea of a future had started, a small future, fragile. The crew looked at Mars differently now. It was no longer only a dead planet. It was a place that tested humans every day, and humans were still standing, but questions never stopped. Could this life last for years? What if a big system failed? What if Earth stopped sending support? Mars had no forgiveness. One big mistake could end everything. Some nights, crew members asked themselves hard questions. Was this worth it? Was leaving Earth the right choice? Earth was still home, but Earth was changing fast. Back on Earth, people watched Mars closely. The colony became a symbol, a sign that humans could survive anywhere or fail anywhere. New missions were planned, more humans would come, more bases would be built. Mars was not meant to replace Earth. It was meant to protect humanity, a backup, a second chance, but Mars would never be easy. It would never be kind. Humans would always depend on machines here. No free air, no free water, no free life. Every breath would be earned. Every day would be a fight, and maybe that was the point. Mars reminded humans how fragile life is, how precious Earth was, how survival is never guaranteed. One day Mars might have cities, greenhouses might cover the land, humans might walk outside with less fear, or maybe not. Maybe Mars will always remain a test planet, a place where only the strongest plans survive. As one crew member looked at the red horizon, the thought was clear. Mars did not save humans. Humans saved themselves by changing, by adapting, by refusing to give up. This was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter written in red dust, a chapter where humans learned that survival is not about comfort, it is about courage, and the question remains, will Mars become our second home? Or will it remind us that Earth was the only true paradise we ever had? The answer is still being written, every single day on Mars.